know what the most is out down that day. And of course it all depends on where you're going. If you walk from here to Weymouth, that's a pretty hard day because you've got the up and down hills.
First seabird, I can tell you exactly the date of that. 31st of December 1956. I think Robert Smith and I went down to Buckshaw, and there were some oiled birds there, oiled guillemots, and we chased after them and caught one or two, and those we took back and washed. But the big time was the early 57. There were lots of them. But every winter after that, in those days it was normal. There were injured oiled birds washed up on the beach every winter. And a lot of them. It varied from winter to winter, how bad it was. In 1960 there was a collision between a Russian ship and another ship inside Poole Harbour. And then it was a great variety of birds that were oiled. And that's when I had my great northern diver and a purple sandpiper. And the purple sandpiper was 6 inches long, and the great northern diver lying down was rather under 2 feet long. The great northern diver came a cropper eventually, but it was first that the purple sandpiper came a cropper, because it got too near the great northern diver, which was not in the mood for that sort of thing, and whose beak was almost the length of the purple sandpiper, and it went and that was sand purple. When they're first washed, they've got to be warm because they've got no lagging, nothing to keep them protected against the cold. So until they dry out after washing, they've got to be indoors near a stove. Once they've dried, they've got a nice layer of air under their feathers, and they can be okay outside. Oster, after the Easter Bunny in German, because of course my second language was Austrian German. So, liebe kleine Osterhase, darling small Easter Bunny, was a poem that we learnt when we were kids in Austria. So Oster was an obvious name for it. I was on my paper round when I saw a cat carrying something. So I put my paper bike against the wall, trade bike, caught the cat, just went to catch the cat, and it let go of a tiny, fairly newly born hare, leveret. So I took that home with me, raised it by feeding it with a little pen filler thing. And it got bigger, and it got bigger, and it got bigger. And we used to have it in the house and going round the drawing room. It reached the point where we decided it had to go when it was running round the sitting room one evening and came to land on my grandmother on her knee, and she patted it, whereupon it pissed all over her. She was very good about things like that, but it was decided that getting to it sell by date. Whether all the hairs out of the head are now descended from it, or whether it was killed the next day by a nasty dog, God knows. Robert and Richard and I would go up to Dalston after school sometimes, or we'd go out to Ballard in the long summer evenings. And then Trev and I started going around together, early 1957. I'd cycle up to Langton and we'd go out to Dancing Ledge and swim or go along the cliff a bit. The weekends we very often did. And Robert was pointing out that there's a kilometre square, which is the most variable in environments in the whole of Britain. The base of Arne Peninsula, out towards Corfe and all that area. Because you've got cliff on one side, you've got the limestone cliff, you've got the shale cliff, you've got the downs, you've got chalk downs, you've got limestone downs, you've got the valley, you've got the heath. All those different things in 1 kilometre square.
We were walking up the Wear. How old were we? 13, 14? And there was a noise coming out the wall that runs up the slope. A peeping noise. That's odd. And anyway, Euler sort of stuck his hand down in this hole and oiked out a little owl. I think which was the chick just emerging out of the egg. Because what I do recollect, we went back knowing where the hole was, and he shoved his, this is after a lapse of a week or so, he shoved his hand back down in the hole at the bottom of the wall, got hold of, he said, I've got hold of something, and he promptly pulled out the owl. And the owl it was sort of blinking in the daylight, and then we just shoved it back in the hole and walked home. But the little owl, the chick, was making a peeping noise as it was more or less hatching. And when I got to know Isla going to grammar school, and we both had a similar interest in birds and started sort of getting up around the cliffs together. And with a third friend, Keith MacDonald, really, the three of us used to tend to get around together. They was living in Swanage. They would bike up to my place, and then we'd meet up and we'd go on up Dowson Ledge and decide what to do then when we sort of hit the cliff. Isla used to always say, well, you come on, you decide which way we're going. We're going west, we're going east, sort of thing. And I have to say, I always preferred going west for some funny reason. I've always felt like that about the world in general. I prefer going west, going east, but of course, it was very different for him. He was very drawn to the Far East and India in particular.
Trevor's very different from me on that sort of thing because he worked on patience, I worked on movement. I was much more interested in moving around to see things, whereas he was the sort of person who'd like to stay at the end of the head and look and see what goes past. That was alien to me, really. I'd do it, but I like going to look for things. About friendship, or very often, is that you are opposites. People are much more interesting if they're opposite than they are if they're the same as you.
I was quite young. My brother and I, we'd go out to the quarry mucking around, and then sometimes we'd shove off, clear off down Pier Bottom and go through the end of the cliff through the Chapman's Pool and be back in time to catch the lorry home and that sort of thing. Because my father didn't have a car in those days, the blokes used to ride to the quarry in the back of the lorry. I remember sort of thinking in vague terms that someone sort of said, oh, you can get up out at St Albans Head, but my dad didn't really encourage this. He knew, obviously, but Chris and I had gone down to Pier Bottom and we worked our way round to the left, south, point of the headland that is, along the shore, and we sort of kept going quite an advance. How was I? It was before I went to grammar school, 10, 9 or 10 or something like that. And he was a bit older, and we got round to the point and could see a possible way up, which is the way up the scree slope at the end, where the quarry debris all chucked down over. So we made our way up and got back to the quarry in time to get the lorry home. I like that. I like going down and under. And of course, as the years went by, I got to know Euler. And then we get down into that undercliff, and in those days, there was peregrines were in that part of the head, particularly around to the east, but weren't breeding at the end of the headland where they are now, more or less under the Coast Guard lookout station, or the West Cliff rather. They were around at Buttery Corner. And Euler and I and Keith MacDonald had sort of got interested in looking at peregrines. They were exciting bird and rare. We didn't see them that often. and we'd go down under the head, and sometimes we'd sit at the end looking out to sea at passing seabirds. I remember seeing the first gannet with some excitement. We didn't have binoculars except a pair Euler had, which was his dad's from the army. So if we did ever see it, which he brought some days, not always, some days we saw something, we'd have to sort of pass him around. And I remember seeing spring migration of migrating gulls coming along and thinking, that's not a herring gull, that's an immature common gull. And we sort of argued over this sort of thing a bit. I think Euler now agrees with me they were immature common gulls because they're an annual feature of St Albans Head, Eastward Passage, the immature. No, the upshot of all that was, particularly the peregrine angle, we went east along the undercliff almost to Butchery Corner and made a hide. We sort of, there was a convenient hollow between boulders, natural boulders, and we walled it up a bit and got some old driftwood, a lot of driftwood washing around then. Put driftwood spars over it and covered it with an old tent and cut turfs and stuff on top of it. I mean, we used to avoid grown-ups. If we saw them, we would sort of duck. So Sid Lander had come by Pothole in nearby. I mean, he saw us in there, no doubt he did, and Alan. But we'd tend not to. We'd sort of keep out of sight, you know what I mean? Same like going down the woods. You're either avoiding Tom Lovell at Wilkesville or Keeper Murray down the other woods. One or the other. There was no adult encouragement whatsoever.
I moved in there in 1944. I was born in 1943. So, when I managed to sidestep the question of whether I was born in Purbeck or not, it wasn't long that I wasn't here. And I was conceived in the ship after all. Ship Inn in Swanage. I worked that out for myself. And I confronted my father with the fact that he must have been up to mischief. It took him some time to confess to it. The house was one of the only ones, since it was smaller than the others, that was not used as a guest house. And we managed to fill it very appropriately. In the photograph that I took in the mid-50s, you can see that the road then was a very narrow, it's taken from one side of the road looking to the house, and it was then very, very narrow. And we grew up there from 1944 to, they sold it in 77, I think, when my parents moved to Farnham. So it was always home, and it was called Tanglin Cottage, which, as you know, Tanglin is a place in Singapore, and the Bishop of Tanglin lived there. People will buy that because it's by the Marchioness of Reading. If it had been by Natalie Smith, they wouldn't have bought it. Heaven knows when he'll be trained. Unfortunately, a tummy upset on removal to Swanage spoilt his much improved habits. He is a bit temperamental at present, works himself into hysterical furies from which he can only be drawn by a sharp slap. Hey, this is a mixture of lettuce and spinach. You'll get drowned. Toby dumped a whole lot of earth here while the place was empty, and I put it on the garden because it seemed fairly, it's different sort of consistency of mine from mine, and as a result I've had fennel come out all over the garden. He had fennel that had grown in the soil, and I see it's coming up again this year. Nice smell actually, it's sort of licorice smell. Here I've done a map of, this is Days Park, coming down to the entrance on Harwell Road. And each of these little rectangles is a bush. Now they're all the right number of bushes, and each bush that's marked has a nest in it. And the notes say what is in the nest. It's mostly blackbird, what is in the bush. Mostly blackbirds' nests. And I see this is Thursday the 21st of March 1957. Introduced one of above eggs, these are eggs from the previous day, to our blackie's nest after marking it. Saw peculiar bunting, very light front with a few speckles, white about the rump, fairly heavily forked tail. A peculiar crest and a well-defined eye stripe. Its beak was not very heavy. Flight unevenly undulating. Voice crook fee fee, crook fee fee. I don't recognise that as anything. When alarmed, chuck chuck. This is the diary from 1960, and this would be middle of June. And here's an entry that's on puffins. There was some circling with food at Bull Rock, the east side of St Albans Head, which there have been no puffins there for many years now. Most of them carried tiny fish. We climbed down at Clifffields, and by doing a lift up, you could look into the ledge and see the puffins sitting about 4 feet away. Two were circling carrying tiny fish, so this is when the young are still quite small. Then it goes on and talks about razorbills, fulmars, kittiwakes, shag. This was a system that Trev used, having just birds here, but very quickly I gave it up because I wrote more about general existence as well as birds. My diary was very rarely just a bird diary. Trev wanted one for an office. He took the caravan, nothing happened with it. It sat there, and it was never used as an office because they had office space anyhow. I could keep the frame saw going, and it was good for me because I didn't have to try and get to and fro from New Swanage from my parents' place. See, the blight shouldn't get in here with a bit of luck. Robert is a bean fan, and if he gets me my olive oil, he'll be worthy of a prize. I moved in here in June 1988, but it wasn't in this caravan. It was a caravan on this site, and it was an aged caravan. It had skylights in the roof, and those were already leaking. And I first came and looked at it, and then I went up to the house and asked Judy. No, that's right. No, Judy told me where to find the place because Mary was out. And Judy said, the caravan is down there on the right. I wouldn't let a dog live in that. And I moved in the next day. I've been here ever since. But for 3 years I was in that old caravan, and it leaked terribly. And the final last straw came when it started leaking over the bed. That was what they called a heavy scene.
I call it the folly. The idea was to perhaps hope for having birds to breed on it, in particular something like an owl. So we designed it with a view to discourage grey squirrels clambering up to the level where the birds' holes are. But having gone to this kind of degree of elaboration, shall we say, having got fairly high, we make more than one hole, which is what I did. I've got jackdaws occupying it. Kestrels did occupy it and bred. Barren owls occupied it and spent some time there and is now apparently moved off. But it did that once before. It occupied one of the 4 holes basically we have. Yeah.
Oh, hear that?
No.
No. Yeah,
Not that.
that one.
I've also got 2 poles nearby with boxes on that I put up before, going to all the malarkey of the stone one. They were fairly simple old telegraph poles with a box on the top. Well, both of those have got jackdaws breeding in them. So one suspicion I have is that the jackdaws are sort of mob-handed in terms of ousting the kestrel. I would prefer to have a kestrel breeding there really than jackdaws, but I mean jackdaws are okay. Stock doves are interested in. I've seen tawny owl go in one of the holes. I mean, all these hole nesting birds, probably it's manna from heaven to have a thing like that suddenly in their neighbourhood.
Just simply a little block of stone. I know kestrels like to be behind the stone. Falcons and peregrines the same. The side, remember that white whale? You can hardly see it from the boat. There's a little white irises were just hidden behind this little small stone. That trip in Scotland, we went into where the seagulls were nesting on a cliff on Mull, I think it was. I spotted a nest, and it was behind a little rock and a small tree. You had there was a little stone, little ledge, little stone, little tree growing.
And in those days, of course, he had no shed. He just had a box down here. But you could do those things in those days. Nobody was going to nick anything. I came down here one evening and Trev and Sue were just going out. So they said, come along. And we got off the head and it was getting dark. And suddenly the thunderstorm broke. And the lightning was flashing all around us. Sue was really nervous. We landed in Crab Hole. And we got up to the square later on and everybody had been watching the storm out of the door. But we'd been all among it. This is bloody useless milk. The cow ought to be shot. That's not very polite. Fucking hell, talk about looking at gift. No, paradise is in my garden. But it's the second paradise. I only have to look upon my little acre, or half acre, and feel eternally grateful to Mary. Although she knew she was doing me a favour, I don't think she could ever know quite how much of a favour it was.
It's quite clayey there, but I've put in all sorts of stuff over the time whenever I can
I used to regularly have horses in the next field, so that enriched the soil a fair amount.
Explores the idea of consent in our digital lives. First, here's Fee Glover with today's visit to the Listening Project. This is a very touching conversation.
There we are. When you go hiking, you have to have somebody to carry your baggage. Okay, that's where I went wrong yesterday. I've counted them, they're 23. Because you've got to have the bar and you've got to have the carpets. And there is my great-grandfather, and there is his friend Campbell, tall, in his old-fashioned, him and a boater, and him in his old-fashioned solar topi. This is going out shooting. That's in the mountains in Kashmir somewhere, but they're climbing up, and it takes them 1,000 feet an hour. And that's their tents. Crossing the Dag Rayan, I don't know what that is. 1,000 feet a minute, that's coming down the other side, okay? They're both going their different ways. You see, they're both stationed at different regiments at different places. So Colonel Campbell is going, oh look, the two dogs are confronting each other. Colonel Campbell is going off his direction, and James Archibald Ferrier is going off in this direction. And not a very secure bridge, that one. This is before you had digital cameras, you see. My great-grandfather, James Archibald Ferrier. There we are. There's the mountains. This is Kashmir again. With a typical Kashmiri bridge. There's Kashmir at night. They're crossing in the rain. There's in darkness. That's a temple too. With the grass growing on the roof. That's quite typical. There we are. That's what I'm looking for. On a boat. Beer bottles. There is my grandfather, great-grandfather, James Archibald Ferrier, pulling the, what's the name, through his rifle, because they're going out shooting. And what does it say? Their preparation. There you are. And he's pissed. He's been drinking. It's Isla's Gorse wine. One more thing that's got to go in, the most important bit.
there's a beach free tomorrow. I said, what time is it? I've always missed it, I said. He said, 10 o'clock. It's fine. So next morning I came down, and being me, I parked my bike up at the where your car is, and I then came down here. It seemed very empty. There was a little knot of people up by the birdringer's hut. I thought they were coming down to Beach Street, but then they started off on a walk up the hill. I got down here, there was not a soul. The beach was spotless, and all the bags were there, filled with shit. And then I realised it was the Saturday that the beach street was on. He got the day wrong. So my grandfather met my grandmother in 1916. They must have at some point visited Agra, where the Taj Mahal is. And one of the minor tombs there is the tomb of Itam ad-Dawla, who was one of his nobles, Shah Jahan's nobles. And there's a photograph of my grandfather, Ilay Ferrier, with Paul Wellman, who's my grandmother's brother, sitting on this wonderful tomb. Both my grandfather's grandparents met and married in India. My parents met, although they married here, they met in India. Grandfather was an Ilay Ferrier, and my grandmother had been sent out as a younger daughter of a decent family to go and visit her brother, which was also a euphemism for finding herself a husband. She was then 20, so she sailed out to India. It was 1915-16. She travelled through the north of India. She went into a city in Uttar Pradesh, which is the northern state of India, and met an Indian army officer, British Indian army officer, whose name was Ilay Ferrier. She then moved on to a hill station called Nainital, where she met another Ilay Ferrier, who was a young army officer, and that one she married. So my grandfather was Scottish family. The Islay came from the island of Islay, but spelt differently, I-L-A-Y, like the Lord Islay on Scottish banknotes. No S's in there. My mother was born the following year, 1917. My grandfather was Indian Army. But Islay is my generation, his generation. His grandfather was also an Islay and goes back into the 17th century. So he married my grandmother. She did the decent thing and stayed in sensible places, while he had to go and fight in various wars inside India or outside. He was badly injured in the First World War and was invalided out. But he had septicemia, pre-penicillin. He continually had trouble with it. Although he lived for another 20 years, it was finally that war wound that killed him. Whereas my father's father, he was gassed in the First World War. That gassing killed him also about 20 years later. So my grandfather was buried in a place called Murray in Pakistan. I used to visit his grave and repair it because all the crosses in that British graveyard were smashed. And so I'd spend time finding the bits of his cross, putting it together and gluing it with stone glue. So the photograph I've taken of the cemetery shows the cross standing. It's the only cross to be standing, and it wasn't long that it was quickly knocked down again to protect Islamic purity. My parents met at a party in Secunderabad and engaged for quite a long time. They didn't finally marry until
early in 1940.
This is from the end of my first trip to India. It's in September 1965, and I'm heading down. There's war between India and Pakistan. We can't go back overland, so I've arranged to meet the French guys that I was travelling with in Bombay, and I'd gone off to look at some monuments. So I arrived back in Bombay. I've got no money. They've got some money to give me, and this is what I wrote to pass the time. With 2 hours left until I can hope to see Claude and then get something to eat at last, I'm at a loss to find something to do. It's 6:10 and the shadows are long. It'll be a dark night tonight because of blackout. I wonder if the opening stages of the first or second wars seemed as tawdry to us as this whole business seems to me. Undoubtedly we made the initial mistake in allowing the partition of one country, particularly on religious basis, which at least one of the two strongly adheres to, and which could easily appear here as well. And there has just been a concerted effort to remove me from the post office steps, where at present I am ensconced. This eviction is somehow due to the blackout, the danger of espionage, and the imminent bombardment of the city. However, I am welcome to sit on the pavement, where I can 1. Blow up the main street, 2. Observe the ladies' legs, and 3. Throw bombs at buses. Still, a little melodrama in a dull life never did any harm.
The second time I went to India, I carried this with me. It belonged to my mother. It's ideal for telling you how to get to the nearest statue of Queen Victoria, if you feel the necessity. The Brahmanical story is that Shiva, being inconsolable at the death of his wife Sati, the true one, tears rained from his eyes and formed 2 pools of katas or kataksha, raining eyes, and Pushkar near Ajmer. Now I told you about Pushkar. At the foot of Katera, the West Hill, are the remains of 12 temples clustered in a corner of an old fort. These are called the Satgahara, which is funny because Sat means 7 Garas, or 7 temples, yeah, and are popularly attributed to the Pandavas, who are said to have lived in Katas during a portion of their 7 years' wanderings. The picturesque village of Chua Saidan Shah, which contains a good rest house, is noted for roses and the attar made from them. Kushab, on the right bank of the Jhelum, is a place of great antiquity. Okay? So there you are, it's Katas. That's the place.
Namaste.
No, he sees the whole thing, basically.
Yeah.
It's
I
the greed that
do,
makes the destruction.
do you think he might be right? It might be true. He said that they might have broken some about 200 havelis in Churu, maybe for.
But you count little houses as well.
Yeah.
But it's,
There wouldn't be so many, right?
no, but he's just upset by the whole thing.
Yeah.
So he's exaggerating things. But on the other hand, he will know better than I do in some ways, since he's going around all the time, delivering stuff.
I like this haveli.
Yeah.
Cherubs, are they like
The cherubs
guy?
are very careful that they're modest.
Are they like male cherubs, Ayla, or female?
Well, we can't tell, can we? That's hidden.
No, I like male
They're-
cherubs. They're no like boobs and stuff.
Well, they look pretty mixed sense. And this is what got me into the painted area.
and into the murals that became my obsession. I'd met a guy on a train going out of India. We'd exchanged addresses. I was on my way to England. When I came back next time, I went to his village. And I stayed there for some weeks. And while I was there talking to some of his friends in the evenings, I said I was going to leave on a bicycle. So he was a business class man. We went off to the market and we bought me a second-hand bicycle. Straightforward, sit up and beg, no gears, very strong carrier on the back. But the second day, I came into a place called Taranagar. Rajgad was the first place. Rajgad, famous as the birthplace of Lakshmi Mittal, the great steel magnate, the richest man in Britain, or one of them. He came from there. He would have been there when I was there. He'd been a little boy with aspirations, whereas I was a big boy with aspirations, but just our aspirations weren't quite the same. I learnt my first new Hindi vocabulary in Rajgad because a boy in a little straw hut called me over and he said, "PGA, PGA," a little like a watering can, and he said, "PGA," and I realised he was pouring water for me to drink. So PGA is the polite form of "please drink." If he'd been impolite, he would have said "Pio," which is order. PGA is the polite form. So I went and PGA'd. But I went on from there, and by the evening I got to a place called Taranagar. And that was the end. I couldn't go any further because I'd watched the milestones and I'd realised, well, I've got to stay tonight at this place because that's as far as I can get. And then I was reliant on reading the English milestones, and they were every 5 miles or every 10 miles. And I hardly met a white skin on the way. And it's where I started learning Hindi and found I'd got to, because every night I was staying at places where there weren't any English speakers. If you're on a bicycle, you can't choose to go from X to Y, two nice comfortable cities where there are people who speak English. You end up in Z and Q, which are two little villages where there isn't a teacher and where nobody speaks English. And they're sympathetic, they're nice people, but you can't communicate with them. You soon learn that. That's when I really noticed these painted houses with all these wall paintings, and I could date them because they had pictures of George V, Queen Mary, cars, trains, obviously early 20th century. A lot of the large houses have outside walls covered in paintings, hunting scenes, soldiers, rajas, excellent camels, horsemen and stylized elephants, abstract designs, and even an English lady in a 1910 hat shaking hands with a gentleman over the garden fence. Also Rajasthani dancing girls. At the temples, gods and their stories. Many of the houses have their second or third floors overhanging the street, held by brackets of the same stone on its side and carved. The underside of the projection is also painted, and often with faces which, protected from the sun, have faded less. And then I found a dharamsala to stay in, which is a cheap place. See, a lot I'd learnt from Suresh, the guy I'd met on the train, the village I'd come from. He said, stay in dharamsala, it's cheap. So I'd found a dharamsala, which was going to cost me nothing. And they gave me a room. I had a padlock, which was an essential, you carry your own padlock. And a Mr. C.C. Goyle, okay, I called in and he said, "You don't want to stay at a place like this, you come and stay at my house." And I really wanted to stay where I was. I was quite happy I was going to lie down, relax, read a book, but he was insistent, so I went to his house. And he took me around and showed me these painted buildings, showed me inside them, because he knew the people. He was business caste. The owners of the houses were business caste. None of them were living in the houses were locked. But he took me inside the house, and then I cycled on to the next place, which was a place called Sadasha, where there were even more of these painted buildings. And by then I knew in Rajasthan there were painted buildings. So when I finish, I'm interested in the painted buildings. I come back, and I go back to Churu, one of the places I forget how it started. But anyhow, in Chura, I met up with Nandu, and knowing that he was honest and reliable and everything else, I could relax and use that as my base. For many years, my address was Bharat Boot House, which means Indian boot house, which was a shoe shop in the bazaar. And some people, finding this strange, they would send my letters to Bharat Boat House, because you don't get boot houses in England. And of course, there weren't many boats around in that area, only the ships of the desert. Going back round the head, I got off the Coast Guard station, and suddenly I knew that there was a sound of a siren, and I knew I was about to be saved. I am saved, obviously. Anyhow, there was a man, a Coast Guard man in uniform, on the top of the cliff, calling through a loud hailer. And he shouted down, I could only just hear, but he sounded like, the man in the rowing boat, can you hear me? So I shouted back, I can just about hear you, but you're not going to be able to hear me. And he shouted, to me? I can't hear you. So I thought there was no point in continuing that conversation. So I just went on rowing. And he continued going along the top of the cliff, playing his siren, and occasionally shouting through the loud hailer what I couldn't hear, until I rowed into Chapman's Pool. In 1963, after having the summer on Brantesy Island, I went off to London to study zoology and geology at Chelsea College of Advanced Technology. After I graduated, I met an Indian student who was studying music at Trinity College. His name was Billu Tilak Sethi. We got a flat together. I was doing supply teaching and he was studying his music. We had a grand piano in the front of a very grotty basement, which he worked on. Then we moved to Paris, where he was studying under Nadia Boulanger, the composer teacher, who was right at the end of her game then. She used to go to sleep in his lessons. And I was teaching English in Berlitz. Now, we split up in 1970. I came back and went to work in the quarry for a short time before taking a trip to India. Glyn, he must have done it back in the early 70s. He and I used to go down there swimming a lot. That was east of Dancing Ledge. He did quite a lot of drawings actually, or paintings, either on themes that he sketched when he was down here or doing them as like that while he was here. That's Studland Church, of course. But that one had a bit of an accident. When I was living in Ivy Cottage, it was hanging like that, unframed, on the wall of the downstairs kitchen, and the place was completely battered and falling to pieces. I slept above the kitchen and in an old brass bed that was there when I moved in, because I was just squatting there. And one night I woke up in the night and went for a piss. I'd been drinking, okay? And I seem to remember this the next morning, but I couldn't think what I'd done. And then when I came down into the kitchen, I happened to glance at that picture, and it was all wrinkled and damp. And then I realised that I'd got out of bed, pissed on the wall, and the floor was separated from the wall. There was a crack between the two. And it had gone down over the picture, which didn't improve it actually. It gave it an elderly touch, but
Sort of,
it's not a thing I've ever done before or since. but I have a permanent reminder of it now.
In the spring and early summer, I like to spend a lot of time up on the cliffs between Delston and St Albans Head. When we were kids, Trev and I, we used to go along and count and watch the different auks, guillemots, razorbills, puffins and other seabirds and keep some record of their numbers. Well, some of them have gone down over the years, like the puffins, which are now down to about 3 pairs. When we were kids, you'd go up there and sometimes see a flock of 60 or 70 sitting on the sea near Dancing Ledge. The guillemots and razorbills seem to be slowly increasing recently, presumably because they don't take such a clobbering from oiling. Because many died from being killed by waste oil on the sea in the channel. It's busy. And I still keep a record of what there is. Things come, things go.
And that's Powder House, look, at the very end of its life now, about to fall over with work paving. And that's Portland Stone. Have you ever gone out there? There's some Portland Stone block. A boat sank there and the block sits on the ledge and remains there because, of course, there's not enough velocity to power in the tide and waves to knock it off again. It's been there also probably from the 18th century. When we were kids, we used to go up to Durlston in the evening after school very often and climb down to 2 different ledges to get gulls' eggs for eating. This ledge we called the easy ledge, and this one, which you had to climb down a drain pipe and then down to this level, was the hard ledge. One day I deviated off from the normal route down to somewhere here and discovered a walled up cave. There is the walled up cave, which you could enter through the door there. And inside I found a piece of lead. It was obviously used at some point, and the only reason it could have been used was for storing tubs, as they called the small barrels of brandy, during smuggling. There are accounts of the excise people chasing smugglers up there, but it always just mentions Tillywim. Now, people have assumed it means Tillywim Caves. Well, Tillywim Caves, if you look at them, are completely unsuitable for that sort of thing. Here you've got a place that's difficult to get to and fro from, under an overhang, and hard to find. And I'm sure that's what it was used for. There's no other reason anyone would wall up a place like that. That's the way I go to Wareham, over the top of the hill and then through the woods and then Sherford Bridge, Corfe Castle, that's the Middleby Road. Raven, it's a young raven sitting on a post, there you are.
There's a group of ravens there. All looking ravenous. That's an adult there and two young ones. That's the east end of the Winspit quarry. And then you've got Sheer Cliff here, and then this other quarry which they call Hallswell, because the ship went into the cliff there. January the 6th, 1786, with a lot of the people drowning. But some of them managed to get up the cliff and get off to Eastington Farm. In the accounts they talk about there being a cave there, and I sort of said to Trevor, there's no cave there, there's no sign of a cave. And he pointed out that when we were kids you had this very narrow bit of quarry you had to go past, and of course there had been a cave and the cliff had fallen. So the rocks down there are what were the roof. So the accounts are right, and I was wrong.
I grow quite a variety of different plants in the garden here. Some of them do fruit would be edible in the winter, and some of course in the summer. I try to fill the whole year. The tightest time is in April and May, when there are always nettles. Nettles make a good green vegetable. The main and the universal enemy in the garden is the slug. You can try anything against slugs, nothing works. And this year, for the first time, I've used slug pellets. They do work, but I hate the idea of using poison in the garden.
(978-0- 9929151-2-4. Are you dead? Hey? He's gone dead. These are pictures taken just after Mary died. Here are the old furniture, you remember that? That fireplace. Hilda and Maggie over the piano. Mary's bed was there for the last few days before she died. And then she used to, in the cold weather, she'd curtain that bit off and have the fire there with her little television. And that was her little home during the daytime. Various odds and ends. She's all in the kitchen window. There was an owl in the kitchen window there. And that's the oldest part of, that's one of the oldest windows, Elizabethan windows. Which you've got, that's her aunt, Hilda's sister. One of the chests under the Four Loves, the famous one. That one's called House Hunting, with a Bavarian Schloss in the background, which is obviously playing around with Corfe Castle. That is Mary's bedroom window. Her desk, pristine. There's the kitchen. Some of this pottery is done by Amy Krause, who was famous and worked at Sandford Pottery. She was famous, well, quite famous potter, certainly in Dorset. One of her wood constructions, bird-like. Perfect. This is the kitchen, of course, with those rafters removed, so that let in more light from the upper window. I always loved the way she had her cooker in this sort of cupboard recess. Famous Peter Scott founded the World Wildlife Fund as he was in 1915. Let us see him closer. He's not yet the bald old fellow that one was used to seeing. There we are. Lots of blonde hair. He's got his World Wildlife though. What the significance of the goat and the snow. This of course was shortly after his father was killed died in Antarctic. Scott of the Antarctic was his father, in case you didn't know. And that's Judy's clearing away some stuff. This is the day after Mary died. So hot water bottles and everything, and flowers coming in, or perhaps 2 days after, because the flowers didn't come until the day after. Ah.
I think we got your signature in square and compass. That would definitely time by the time we got it. Liz Frink. Do you remember Liz Frink?
She's faintly related to me, and I never.
Well done. Busy.
You haven't seen it yet? No, that's okay. That's his film. I hear your praise about the result of the. Well, you've got to pay it first.
Oh, I've seen it, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I keep not remembering what the year is.
Hey, watch it.
Well, we thought it's something for Crime Watch or something.
Hey, I see your museum's coming along.
Yeah.
Ah. So, got to be a lot of free booze and stuff at the.
Well, if you come, yeah.
No, if I walk there, I've got to walk back, haven't I?
Well, it'd be advisable if you drink too much, yeah.
Yeah.
Not on a bike. Go on, you get on, do what you got to do. I'm sure there's.
No, I've got to catch the tide, haven't I?
Yeah. You walking around, both of you?
No, we've come from the other way.
Yeah, you walking around that way then.
Yeah.
I'll get going then. Go on. Good to see you.
Good to be seen.
I know which the most exhausting one was. That was in the Such Pass with a Tibetan guide. Keeping up with him. We've been up to 5,000 metres, over 5,000 metres, which is quite high.
Beginning to feel it at that height.
Yeah, I didn't notice it. The only thing I noticed it was when I spent the night and just they've got these cottages, but roofless cottages, that they just put polythene over the top at the beginning of the pass, so people can stay there and they can charge them money on them, and then in the winter they take their polythene away. Anyhow, they put me in the same place as this Tibetan guy, and he was just sleeping next to me in the quilt, and he was just sleeping like a baby straight away, and I was, having had no problem all the way up to there, I was aware of my breathing all night, which kept me awake all night, you know. And the next morning when we set off walking, I thought it was going to be a nightmare. It was actually no problem when I was actually walking. But when he left, he went quite a long way. And he was going And when he left, I found he dropped me at a bungalow where I could stay. And I didn't sleep all that night. But that was just, I was so exhausted, I just couldn't sleep. I've never been so exhausted. But that probably was also the altitude. On the beach in a place where there were only about 3 places where you get signals. He was very tolerant. Then he had no real. He'd learnt never to be judgmental.
Horace Alexander.
Yeah. But Trev was closer to Horace than I was. They were more of a kind in many ways. Both more thoughtful, more philosophical, which I wasn't. I was more spontaneous in some respects. I always remember going out bird watching out at Lodmore, Weymouth Bay. Horace, me and Trev. I was sitting in the middle, that's right. And it was a nice sunny day about this time of the year. And Trev just fell asleep. And Horace said to me, "Do you think we should wake the old man up?" Oh, Jesus, Mary and Joseph. There's the greens. No, no greens at present. No, that spinach is just about over.
Nettles are young and fresh now, aren't they?
They are now, but in a few days they'll start flowering.
Is it best to eat them before they flower?
Yeah. Let's hold the Angoor. There's a Keralite boy just having caught a fish and leaping over the rocks in his little sarong. That's a picture of the memorial dome of a man called Lakaji, who was the ruler of Kutch, which is the extreme west of India. If you think of India as a diamond shape, it is the west side angle. And Lakaji ruled in 1750, 1760, sometime like that. And a memorial like this, they call it a chhatri, umbrella, is raised on the cremation site of the person that's commemorated. He was a bit of a Renaissance ruler, although he didn't last very long, 20, 30 years. And one of the things he did was to patronize a Gujarati sailor who went off and discovered Europe. And there he got into all sorts of industries. He worked in glass and he worked in metal and learned the technologies, brought them back with him, with the result that they then created various factories manufactories, small places, in this princely state. Anyhow, that's his memorial as it stood back in 1990s. And that's it as it is now. That was the result of the earthquake in 2001. I was on my way down to this area, this is the epicenter, more or less. And I was on my way down on the 26th of January 2001. And the 26th of January is apropos because it's the Republic Day in India. Anyhow, on that day, I was travelling on my motorbike down from a place called Barmer in Rajasthan towards here, and stopped at a hotel. And in the early morning, and I woke at 3:30 to hear the snoring and the TV still blaring from next door. Eventually, I turned off their electricity from outside. When I woke, I had a masala dosa, then reread my letters home, and had just sealed them when the quake hit. The whole place shook continually and violently, but I didn't forget to lock the door before fleeing barefoot into the street. The middle of the road was crowded. One or two guys, clad only in towels, had been having their bath. It was a weird sensation. I'd never been in such an intense quake. All the trees were shaking oddly. I didn't fancy staying longer, so I packed and left. Got on my motorcycle towards Kutch, the area I was heading for. It became clear that the earthquake had been worse as I came further south. Radhanpur was very busy, and I decided to look for the government bungalow rather than stay in some precarious concrete block. But now I found Bachau and Gandhidham were central and very badly damaged. These were places ahead of which I was going to go to. And Anjar was being evacuated. The bridge on the other route, for Halvad to Kutch, was down. There was a constant stream of people coming out of Kutch past here, including ambulances. I'd been through the town and seen a crowd of people near the school, all evacuees. I decided to sleep in the cab of a truck beside the bungalow. Didn't fancy the expansive, heavy concrete ceilings of the bungalow. That's the Victoria Terminus in Bombay. It's the main railway station there, or one of the main railway stations. And the reason why I find that one interesting is that I spent time there in the first class waiting room in 1965 on my first trip to India. I'd come overland, and along with many other Europeans, and then war was declared between India and Pakistan, which blocked the road homewards. So everybody moved towards Bombay, because in those days flight was too expensive to think of flying home. And coming into Bombay, we decided that we couldn't afford a hotel. So everybody had the same idea and ended up in the first class waiting room. And from there, we arranged to come back overland, by sea, take a British India. There was a regular ship going across from Bombay to Khorramshahr in Iran and then to Basra.
but there was a cholera epidemic in Iran, so you couldn't go to Iran either. So that was my first sort of experience of Bombay, staying there. These are the Bheels in eastern Gujarat, in a very isolated area, a place called Matwar, celebrating Dasera, which is a festival in October. Now, these people are looked down on by the caste Hindus because they're not in the whole Hindu caste community. And a friend of mine was a close friend of theirs, a local man, knew a lot of them, and we would go up to some of their festivals. He would take me there. On this occasion, we'd gone up for this particular sacrifice. The young guy has just cut off the head of the first of a series of goats, and you can see the head flying up in the top right corner of the picture. And there's another goat, white goat, waiting for its turn. There's the great chasm from which most of India's white marble is dug, including the Taj Mahal came from this place. It's a place called Makrana, south of my area, Shekhawati, where I did so much work on the wall paintings. And this is taken quite a few years ago when the cranes were still operated by hand. And they've dug out most of the pure white. The chasm is really where the pure white marble has been taken out. And it's quite deep now. A lot of it's flooded with the groundwater. And a lot of the winding of the cranes is done by women. Anyhow, that's where they draw their marble from. And it goes all across India and abroad. In Kerala, which is the state goes along the southwest coast of India, it's quite a small state, very highly educated. There was contact with Chinese traders up until the closing of China in the 17th century. And there's considerable influence in that area. Kerala produced a lot of spice and still does. It's a centre for cardamom, coffee, cloves, pepper. But these nets are found nowhere else in India. They're pivoted so that you lower the whole of the net structure into the deep water, fairly deep water. It's on the end of a little jetty, as you can see. Then keep it down for a bit, then pull it up. With a lot of fish there, it usually brings up some fish with it. I've watched them doing this. These ones are actually at Cochin near Ernakulam, central Kerala, on the west coast. This lot's blackberry from last year, slow blackberry. One which is okay, but I'll never make again probably, is Bullus, which comes out a disagreeable pink. I tried making elderberry wine, but that came out very harsh, and even by mixing it with an insipid blackberry wine, it wasn't a success. You know, they suggest adding sultanas and this and that. but if it means investment, I decide it's not necessary. And Ned will get drunk whether it is decorated or not. That's probably the lot. But the regular ones, every year, slow blackberry elderflower. Several years since I made gorse, probably about 4 or 5 years. And then this year I thought there's so many gorse flowers around, let's go mad. Now, out it comes.
Another one that's really nice to get is the first blackcap. Well, the blackcap's not singing at present, but it, oh yes it is. That's in the distance. That's a robin. That one. No, wait a minute. That's a no. That one there, rather fluid one. There's a robin in the foreground and there's a blackcap in the background. And there has been a whitethroat this year, which is unusual. Oh, there's a blue butterfly. It's funny, the blackcap can't have nested here this year. It's not singing so much. Often it's over the van and round the van. It's not this year. Saw my first swift yesterday, 26th of May. It's amazing. I've never seen one so late, but I've been so busy indoors. And they don't really fly over here much. And then the day after that, I cycled down to Devon. Dorchester tomorrow, early in the morning, because I've got to be there to meet Robert coming out of the hospital, and then on to Devon on Saturday. So from there, I've got several routes I go actually, because I go down there fairly often now. Which one am I going to do tomorrow? Next day. Probably one way, I like going near Pilston Pen actually, west going road. You cross it and then go down to Beaminster. From Beaminster you can head towards Pilston Pen. And then towards Axminster and into Axmouth. They're guides to different countries and they're classics. By the British Fascist Union or something, perhaps not British Fascist Union, but it's the... No, who is it? It's the British People's Party. And it tells you how wicked Poland attacked innocent Germany and set off a war, which we all know about, the war. We didn't know that aspect of it. That's a great book. Monk Gibbon, whose book The Pupil has a lot about Dante. Is that somewhere here there's a... No, there it is. Look at this. This is done by Ludwig, who was a cousin of George Spencer Watson. It's a prayer book. He was obviously very holy, and he did this prayer book with illustrations. Our Father. I don't know where he got the illustrations from. Rather a gem, isn't it? Because they wouldn't call them caste. But then people do. Hamara Hindustan mein log aisa bolte.
Look. असली माल है अच्छा ना आप असली माल है maybe असली माल. Oh, well, I thought you were talking about the Britisher. You mean I look like Steve McQueen? Well, I've heard a lot of things, but that's taking it a bit far. In my best days, I can't remember that far back. पुराने ज़माने में औरंगज़ेब के ज़माने में हाँ. Okay, see you, cheers, bye. Naughty buddy. Of course, this is rainwater from the roof. Nice yesterday going on there, except the light was bad for seeing from the hedge. Goes into the light. Well, there are three families that I'm very much involved with. Salim is Muslim and he lives in South India in Kerala, and I met him in 1970, I think, or 71, I think. So we've known each other for quite a long time, and he was over in Swanage this year, 2016, so we're still in good contact. There's Nandkishore Chaudhary, who, when I met him in Churu Bazaar in 1975, ran a small shoe shop selling small shoes and plastic shoes and that sort of thing, and keeping his head above water, and who is now one of India's leading carpet manufacturers and exporters, employing 40,000 people. And the closest, I suppose, is Ravindra Sharma, who I met in 1980 and who I got as my assistant when he and I were surveying the painted buildings of northern Rajasthan from 1985 to 1987. He and I worked together for 2.5 years, and since we're still on speaking terms, I think that says quite a lot. Yes, 50 years. Always, to start off with, it was overland, because in those days the idea of an airfare was completely prohibitive, particularly for students. Flying was expensive, whereas hitching, which was very widespread then, was free. So you just set off from England and you hitched until you got to India, which could take some time. I've spent so much time there, it's a quarter of my life almost. So there are things that there was our surveying work, 2.5 years of that was with Rabu was good fun. It was fascinating. We both enjoyed it very much, and look back to it with some nostalgia. Motorbiking, I motorbiked around India twice for 2 books, one on arts and crafts of India and one on buildings of India. And I thought the only way you can do it is go around and actually look at the things. I did that trip overland 10 times total, counting one journey out and back as 2. I don't think that one makes us a decision to not want or to want particular things. Many of the things never really appealed to me. My way of life was, I think perhaps one thing I learnt in India is you need very little to have a basic, comfortable existence. And when friends of mine from India come over, like Rabu comes here, he finds this a very comfortable setup. There's a cooker, there's water, there's the basics of life are there. What do I want more than that? One grows into the area that one has. If one lives in a caravan, you have a limit to what you can possess. As it is uncluttered, I've got too much stuff, too many books.
A lot of books, a lot of diaries, a lot of photographs.
Yeah, well, the diaries are going to go on increasing for as long as I live. In 1975, I tried to motorbike out to India on a Jawa motorcycle. The bike was stolen in Istanbul, but I considered it as sort of incomplete business and wanted to do it again. In 1999, I suppose, Peter and I talked about it, Peter Duquesne, and he was up for it during his vacation. He was at university then. So we made plans. I went out to India that winter for work, bought an old motorcycle, got it done up, and returned to England. In July of 2000, he and I flew out to Delhi, picked up the bike, and then set off to Churu. There we stayed at my friend Rabu's place. Peter and I standing outside his house with his father in his dhoti, when they're all waiting to see us go. We travelled from there through Haryana and Punjab to Amritsar, crossed the border into Pakistan, then headed for Baluchistan, the very arid part of western Pakistan. Moved on to Iran. We went to a mud town, which we stayed in and visited, only to discover that I think 2 years later it was completely demolished by an earthquake. From there we went up to Tabriz, a 350 motorcycle, so we're not travelling very fast, 2 of us on one bike with all our luggage. We got into Turkey, along the length of Turkey to Istanbul, then through to Greece and across Greece, cheating by taking the ship up the Adriatic to Venice, across Italy, France, and back to the square and compass. I was up at the head in 1978 in the caravan when there was a blizzard in February.
and the snow built up, coming over the wall, it just built up all around the caravan, and it also fell on the roof of the quarry shed, and to such a degree that it broke in the roof in one or two places, and I got up early in the morning and was digging it off another part where the beams were creaking, ready for it to go. When Robert and I were working together, he was teaching for the educational department. And he was good, and he got promotion. He ended up in DIET, which is the District Institute of Educational Training. And that's really teachers' training college. And there, when I was last out there, he was deputy principal. He was briefly principal. But we went on one occasion to meet some of the students, and Rabu has got copies of all my books, so we took the books to give them something interesting to look at, either the local things or pictures in things like Purbeck Revealed, views of Purbeck, the Sea of Foreign Land.
When I first came to the area, there were still masons around who had painted at the end of the painting era. And I asked them, what did the sets ask them to do? And basically they'd say, see that Haveli, I want better than that. And it was competitive. And so it progressed. Now, when the people moved out, they still had their holdings in the area, and they were still sending money back. But what were they building? Modi College. They were building buildings that were functional, that were important to the society, but they didn't have the individual stamp on. They weren't the house. They were hospitals, they were colleges, they were schools, and the painting stopped. There wasn't a demand.
One morning we went to a hilltop temple dedicated to Karna Mata near a village called Kimsaria. And you go up 1,000 or 1,200 steps. I remember Nanda told me the number of steps and I counted them up and it was actually right. I didn't think it could be so many. At the top there are a collection of what are called palyas, the equivalent of headstones, that each one is a memorial with an inscription on and a horseman on it, usually attended by two people, and it gives the date of the man's death, which in this case they were all dating between 1280 and 1321 AD, because the calendar's different. 57 years different. Many of the buildings are gone, probably 10%, which means a large percentage of the paintings have also gone. I went with a friend of mine to show him one particular favourite of mine, which shows two British officers who come into one of my books sitting having tea, only to find that the whole of that room has been painted over bright purple. So there's not a single record of those paintings. Luckily, I have the whole lot photographed. The survey documentation is in the Intact's office in their library. At the moment, I'm doing a book on 1 year travelling in India, and the diary comes in very useful
because I'll sit down and describe a scene because I'm bored at a particular time. Often it's a scene that's sitting at me when I'm sitting bored. And I'm describing things which, of course, I've completely forgotten about. And it's recalling 1970s, India 70-71. And, of course, to recreate that image when I'm going out to India regularly, how am I going to remember what it was like in those years without that record?
See, it's been in there a long time. See how this crack's opened up? And of course, it doesn't belong there. It's nowhere. It's from somewhere quite different. See there, that's where the crack. See, really, it hints that that Pier Bottom was a site for exporting stone much earlier than the 18th century, when it was. Probably in medieval times, because there's stone from the head, which is in Exeter Cathedral and Christchurch Priory, medieval.
Come and have a look at this. I reckon that is this stone. I said it would be just under that stone.
Weird things down there, like these bits of marble. I just don't know what to make of that. I mean, Charlie Newman even suggested it might be Roman or something. I mean, who knows? What's a bit of Purbeck marble doing in the shore at Pier Bottom, or spilling down into the shore from the reed bed in the recent landslip? Yeah.
Hello.
Hey. Moving, isn't it?
Hey, look at that sky. Because we've got quite a lot of leaves.
I wish I bought bloody proper spade then.
I've seen a bit of a roller and staddles. Was that it? Staddles, definitely. Yeah, I tried to get one in the boat once and we nearly done it and it slipped. I couldn't quite get it over the gunwale. It went down the water. I never got it back. So he's probably still there. It was it. Oh, hang on. Somebody said something else. Anyway, yeah. I mean, they're staddle stones and sinks and rollers were basic cliffstone products through the 18th and early 19th century. So that's all fit. And of course, the other thing was the massive projects like the harbour front work at Ramsgate and Margate and Dover and so on, all taking Purbeck stuff. Second half the 18th century, and I just got this from. There's evidence of the pier in a map, isn't there? This is the track.
There we are. Well, it certainly, yeah, it could well be this cut all four ends.
A stone-built boathouse in Chapman's Pool, built in the stream. Okay, a stone-built shed, not just a driftwood shed. Okay, and latterly in the 19th century it housed the lifeboat. But the question arises: who built it and why? We know the pier exists at Pier Bottom. The pier wouldn't have allowed a big sailing ship to come alongside. You would have had to have had a stone boat to ply between the pier and the vessel. shred of evidence was that when we were boys, there were some squared up blocks up and off the shore in the reed bed. What I call the reed bed. There's a very boggy area there, all masses of reedy stuff. And there were some blocks there. And I remember mentioning to Billy Winspeck. Oh, he said, yeah, they were left over from the Ramsgate job. They are. Ramsgate Pier. Well, they finished that about 1800.
You put a stone in.
I'm not doing very well in response to your request now, but I mean, artists, you know, he had that strong individualism, didn't he? I mean, before I had a boat, his dad had a little dinghy, no more, just a pram for like going out as a tender. And when he was warden, when I left school, 59, went straight to the quarry. I didn't want to go into the sixth form or higher education. I was clear what I wanted to do. And I left really the school as soon as I saw it decently could. But he went on and went to uni, or sixth form and then uni, and he took a summer job on Brownsea as warden. That's the first years when the National Trust had got it. He'd got to know Helen Brotherton because he'd been caring for seabirds. So he knew of this person who was so instrumental in the acquisition of Brownsea by the trust and the setting up of the trust, all of that. But I do remember on one occasion cycling over, I used to get around on a bicycle, cycling over to the ferry and anyway saying goodbye to him when he was on the ferry, Brownsea. He lived on Brownsea for a season. And he had his little dinghy. He set off rowing back to Brownsea, and the tide was hammering out through that harbour mouth. You know what it goes out through, it looked like hell, doesn't it? I thought, blimey. I mean, he beat off in that little thing to get back to Brownsea, which he did. Yeah, goes on doing it, doesn't he? Run a little dinghy around.
Crew, when I was an admiral. I don't remember that.
Film called Miragaon Mirdesh, My Village and My Homeland. Yeah, I've lived all my life here, haven't I? This has been my home since I was a child. Nowhere would replace that. I might be forced by financial necessity to settle in India, but out of choice, it wouldn't be. I'd be here.